Welcome back. So let's keep going though. But as we already know, the British are also going to end up taking over India. Now, the British imperialism in India has been around since the 1600s. Remember when we were talking about exploration, and I don't know what it was, but like Isabel Adams and Brittany Berrettini to my left in class knew exactly what a Raj was whenever we were talking about the Europeans going in to India, and early on they integrated themselves into society by making alliances with India's fragmented society, because no one truly led India from a centralized government perspective. There have been multiple empires that existed in India throughout its history, including that of the Mughal Empire, which was the dying one during the 1600s, which was actually losing a lot of territory. There was another one that a guy named Ashoka led over. I think it's the Gupta Empire. Let me double check that. Gupta Empire. Yep, the Gupta Empire led by a guy named Ashoka, which was a very, very, very cool ancient Indian empire. And so, but India is characterized by stratified states led by princes or rajas. So when the British East India Company went in 1600, specifically created for the going in pursuit of spices and other goods, they would make these alliances with these Rajas and then integrate themselves into society. Now, as the years progressed, though, the British began to settle into India and slowly work their way further and further in. And they're going to take advantage of India because they're fragmented by cultures, local princes, and stuff like that. But again, why India? Why India? Why did the British choose to directly take over India eventually, to the point to where it was no longer the British East India Company running them? It was literally the English crown. So jot this down really quick. Up next to the title, India was considered the crown jewel of the British Empire because it was their most money-producing area. And a lot of people always ask, well, why was India the one to fall subject so hard to British imperialism, direct British imperialism? A lot of it is very multifaceted. But if I had to break it down into a couple of reasons why, one of them includes a very, 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 very great climate for production and the growing of certain things they needed. Okay, so the climate in India lent itself to them being able to grow cotton there very quickly and very efficiently, even though it was only kind of short-lived because America became like the cotton supplier of the entire world, to grow opium when they wanted to sell it to the Chinese, and to grow a lot of different other things. Sri Lanka actually became a huge area for growing tea, and it still to this day produces most tea. And Sri Lanka is a small island right off the coast of India. If I have a second, I'll throw a map up here so you can see where Sri Lanka is. But that's a big part of it, creating a sustainable plantation economy. Second of all, because they're so fragmented, it would be much easier for them to take over, make alliances with local Rajas, and work your way in. And the third, and I think the most, maybe not the most important, but still extremely important reason why the British chose India is due to the fact that they also saw a burgeoning market. So China was a little bit different from India because they had been economically centralized government led by an emperor and several different dynasties, and economically very self-sustaining for a long period of time. Now, granted, they weren't modern, but they were still very economically independent. Whereas India wasn't like that. India was led by these different Rajas and these different provinces, and most of the people were still just peasants that lived there. So when the British got there, they saw a place that would be a great buyer of their goods. The cheap cotton textiles that were coming out of British factories at this point, India became a major market for them, somewhere they could go sell these things to people that didn't necessarily have access to them, okay? So that's why India. So again, I'm saying because the climate there, good for farming. Second of all, because of the fragmented society. And third of all, due to the fact that they became a good international market. So they're going to start pushing in, though, and they're going to start trying to enact direct rule, or not direct rule, but they're going to start trying to be more heavily involved in India. So Britain's going to take a soft-handed approach early on to India, and they're going to do this thing known as indirect rule. Now, indirect rule is when you would leave a local ruler in charge. So you would pay them money, create this alliance, right, to a Raj, and that Raj would supply you with workers or soldiers or conscripts, or a soldier and a conscript, the same thing. But they would supply you with everything that you needed to be able to function there. Port documents, prevention of other European powers trying to get inside of there. Because India was actually, it was not just the British who wanted India. The French wanted India, the Dutch wanted India, the Portuguese, as we remember, wanted India for quite some time. But the British are going to be the ones that take over the entire subcontinent. Now, with indirect rule, though, you leave a local ruler in charge. You convince this Raj to sign a document with you, and then he'll actually agree to continue to supply you with all the things you need. He has now just become your indirect ruler. See, this is the big difference between imperialism and colonialism. Indirect rule is when you leave a local ruler in charge. So since you're paying this Raj to now function as a small imperialistic territory for you, you are now indirectly ruling that Indian sub area, right? Because at one point there was less than 1,000 British rulers that lived in India, but there were 300 million Indians under their control. I mean, this is absolutely wild. By the height of this whole thing, there's only ever 4,000 British direct rulers there, but they're supplied with over 400 million Indians to work for them. So even early on, they took a very soft-handed approach to it. Now, when I say soft, I don't mean that they were nice to them, because one of the biggest reasons why they are going to be able to take over such a vast area is through a lot of military action, direct takeover of some small states, and the suppression of rebellions. Now, Britain's motives, though, changed dramatically in India to militaristic, right? They turned into very militaristic. They wanted to be able to have a military stronghold there. They wanted to take advantage of this new market and sell to the entire continent, not just certain areas. And they also wanted to use them as this mass production grower of new materials, new raw materials. So they could put those raw materials from India into their factories and make even more cheap cotton textile production kind of things. So, as you can see, though, the British are going to end up coming in and taking over the entirety of the Indian subcontinent. Now, when this happens, a couple of good things came along with it. Britain, ironically enough, did help some people in Indian society. Not a lot, not in a good way. Well, in a good way, yes. They tried to get rid of some things that we deem even to this day as negative, but it's overwhelmingly bad at the same time. So the good things they did were really only like 3 or 4 of them. Britain used Indian trade to try and make money. So if you're making money and you're leaving indirect rulers behind, that means many upper-class Indians are going to benefit from this trade. When India fell completely under British government control, when they dissolved the East India Company eventually, because remember, the East India Company died and was dissolved under Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria, let me see, the East India Company. Let's see what year it actually kind of finally perished. The British East India Company ceased operations in 1874 and were dissolved completely by Queen Victoria. And Queen Victoria took over, well, she didn't take it over purposefully, but she sent the military there to create an Indian state completely controlled by the English government. So the Queen Victoria is going to be the big one there. Queen Victoria is the ruler of the 1800s when you're talking about England. Now, Britain, though, is going to use Indian trade to make a lot of money. This is going to create, for the very first time, an Indian middle class. So it wasn't just going to be the peasantry and the Rajas anymore. Now it was setting up kind of this burgeoning small middle class in India, giving some land rights and some wealth to some other types of India and spreading their wealth around a little bit. So another thing they're going to try and destroy is the caste system. Now, the caste system is a very, very messed up system that existed as a part of the Hindu faith. Now, I'm not saying that Hindus are not nice people, because they actually are. Their entire religion revolves around universal forces and being good to one another so that good things can happen to the universal, like to other people in the universe, and projecting positive things. And like, it's a fantastically cool religion. But at the same time, the caste system was a societal perspective used by their religion to try and explain how basically, if you were poor, it's because in a past life you were a bad person. So as a part of the Indian caste system, which is actually demonstrated right down here in this little chart, you basically had 5 Indian classes, right? You had inside of this caste system. It's a social class system. And as according to the Hindu faith, where you were on that class system was where you were in your spiritual journey, your universal spiritual journey. Your goal was eventually to reach the highest class up here, which was a Brahmin, a priest, and a teacher. No big deal. I'm not a priest, but in the Hindu subculture, or in the Hindu culture, if you were a priest or a Brahmin, that must have meant that in your past lives, because they believed in a concept known as reincarnation, when you die, your soul returns to Earth. Depending on how you were in that past life is where you're going to end up in this next social class. So if you were a Brahmin, that means you lived several good past lives and you were able to kind of keep niching your way up the system. And if you led your great life as a Brahmin and you did what you were supposed to do, your ultimate goal was that of union with their universal god known as Brahman. All right, so that is the principle of the caste system within the Hindu culture before the British got there. But here's where it's messed up. Let's say hypothetically we got Ali Marcus, who's a Brahma or a Brahmin in India, right? She's a Brahmin in India. She's a priest, or she's a teacher. Well, ironically enough, y'all couldn't have been because you were women, but we're not going to get into that right now. Brahmins, right? And she was a Brahmin, but she was shady, right? She was being mean to people. She pushed Jaden down. She tripped Katie at track practice one day. Was being just a real big jerk. When she dies and comes back, according to the wheel of karma and according to the universal forces that were guiding her life, she would be reincarnated a class below Brahmin. As in kind of like you were a bad person, now you're going to keep going down. And the lowest class out of all of them was known as the Dalits, or the Untouchables. Now, the Untouchables were heavily persecuted by other Indians in their religion. Dalits weren't allowed to live in certain areas of the city because they were too poor, or considered too poor. Dalits had to carry an instrument around with them called a clapper, which was 2 pieces of wood that was like this, to warn the people in the streets that they were coming, because everybody in India thought that they spread disease. So now you see what I'm talking about. The British tried to get rid of this caste system, and they were like, no, you shouldn't be stuck in a certain class. Let's get rid of this caste system. Let's make this more of a free-flowing economy. Now, the problem with this, too, though, is that you're throwing their religious perspectives out the window, which is really messed up, and you don't want to force Christian laws onto a non-Christian community, but still. So that's the caste system that they try to get rid of. They're going to improve roads. They also tried to improve women's places in society. They tried to give women more rights in the Indian society, because I don't know, there's this one practice that you can actually see right down here, known as sati, that they outlawed completely. Now, that the British are going to outlaw completely because they saw it as kind of vindictive and messed up to women. Now, what sati is S-U-T-T-E-E, was when if a Hindu man died, his wife was expected, since she was basically considered in the caste system whatsoever, she was expected to jump on her husband's funeral fire or be executed because she was nothing without her husband in the Indian society pre-British, which is a very, 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 very messed up thing that the British tried to outlaw, which is we would see as a progressively good thing now. But going forward, all these good things are going to be wildly outweighed by the negative things that the British did while they were a part of Indian society. The biggest thing is they're going to lead to several revolts. Now, the biggest out of these revolts was known as the Sepoy Mutiny of 1857. Now, what a sepoy is they're these guys right here, okay? So if you see a man wearing something like this, that means he's a regular sepoy soldier. He is like a ground troop. He's not a rank up. So the sepoys were drafted Indian soldiers. So remember when I said indirect rule and how there was only about like a couple thousand British at any given moment to rule over 300 million Indian people? Well, when the British took direct control over India and called them their crown jewel and actually took over the Indian subcontinent altogether, they forced Indian men to actually be soldiers in their army, and they called them sepoys. Now, the sepoys were given a lot of negative stuff. Their officers were not considered anywhere close to the ranking of that of a British soldier. This is one of their officers right here, and this is a regular conscript. Now, their officers were usually coming from high-ranking noble families, and what they found out is that if something happened to them or they died outside a foreign land, that their land would be stripped from them and then given to just a peasant class, which they were not having. They were not okay with that at all. They wanted the land that was a part of the original caste system to stay within their family, and so that, of course, as you can see, the caste system regulated a lot of things before the British showed up, so it wasn't negative that they got rid of it like that. they should have got rid of it in a much more progressive and slower fashion. Now, but one of the biggest reasons why the Sepoy Mutiny is going to break out is just a lot to do with negativity from the Sepoys towards their British captors, we could call them in a sense. So the Sepoys were all given this type of rifle that you see them holding in their hands. It's called an 1837 Infield Rifle. Now, the Infield Rifle is a front-loading musket. It's not like the Dreisen needle gun we talked about with the unification of Germany. With a front-loading musket, carrying around with you a small bag of cartridges. Now, these cartridges would kind of look like this pen a little bit. They actually look a little bit more like a, best thing I can compare them to is a cigarette. Like they're about like this long, and they're about that big wide. And let's see if I can look up one real fast for you, just so I can give you some kind of perspective. Here we go. So this is what the cartridges looked like. All right. So now these cartridges came pre-packed and pre-loaded with all the parts necessary to be able to load your Infield rifle with. And as you can see, the secret that preceded the Indian Rebellion. All right, so this is what we're getting into right now. You see these cartridges, right? So inside of that cartridge was gunpowder. I wonder if I can find a diagram for it. Here we go, yeah. Inside of that cartridge right there was gunpowder, a bullet, grease on the back end, and it was all inside of a paper case. Now, as you can see, an Indian soldier would have to put this thing in their mouth, tear it open, pour it all down in there, take the ramrod, and then actually jam all that stuff down, pull it back up, be able to shoot it. Now, of course, they would use the paper as wadding and stuff like that, but here's the big key thing right here. Putting that cartridge inside your mouth. So a rumor had started to spread all over the Indian subcontinent that those cartridges were sealed with this stuff called tallow. And tallow is a mixture of pig and cow fat. Now, not only did you just offend one religion in India, but you've now officially offended two of them. Because Muslims that live in the northern India subcontinent believe that pigs are an unclean animal and they don't eat them, so it's violating their religion there. Hindus that you recruited to be sepoys believe that cows are sacred animals and that they should not be eaten, disturbed, or imbibed. So you just offended two of them. This rumor wasn't necessarily true. We don't really know what they were sealed with at the time, but it might not necessarily have been true, but this rumor still spread, leading to a lot of hysteria and a lot of negativity and a lot of negative views of the Sepoys against their captors, and they're going to start kind of revolting against their officers. They're going to refuse to do firing drills. They're going to refuse to do a lot of stuff. Some of them end up being hung, some of them end up being killed, and then this leads to a massive revolt that takes place throughout all of northern India, and it's going to be suppressed, though, big time. The British show up, and they massacre the Sepoys in their mutiny. And the British used cannons and more advanced weaponry to do this thing. And they also did this really messed up thing to kill a lot of to execute a lot of the officers that led the revolt. They actually did this thing called the blowing of the gun, where they would strap the person to a cannon and then fire the cannon as an execution form. Now, these are going to end up all over British newspapers back in Great Britain, and it's going to lead to just massive disgust from the British people, leading Queen Victoria to actually dissolve the East India Company after all this mutiny and these other things like that, and her taking over India directly as a government. Now, they're also going to force Christian laws on Hindus, and Hindus are going to resist. Deforestation is a huge negative thing as well. They're going to burn down forests, build factories and railroads to try and create more of a plantation-style economy and areas for them to actually be able to plant cotton plantations as well as grow opium. Now, the population growth also in India that's going to come about due to the massive amount of British imperialism, because they did bring with them medicines and other things like that. Population growth in India is going to actually cause famine within the Indian population, which is also absolutely terrible. Now, the other place that the Europeans are going to go is not necessarily the first stop. It's actually one of the later ones. This is actually a typo. So it's one of the later stops. It was that of Africa. So Africa was going to be one of the later areas to fall subject to imperialism as well. China being one of the best early examples to discuss. India had been falling subject to imperialism since the 1600s, so they're a very good one to discuss as well. Now, Africa, though, when it falls subject to imperialism, it falls hard, and it falls to the entire European continent. Now, European contact in Africa, as we already know, isn't a new thing. You know, Europeans had been in Africa for quite some time, ever since the pre-Columbus area in 1457, I believe it's 1457, Vasco da Gama navigated completely around the Cape of Good Hope and found his Portuguese trade route all the way to India. Speaking of being back in India, let's look that up really quick. Vasco da Gama, 14... Oh, it says 1497. Did I say 57? I did say 57. So, yeah, he's going to, find that trade route back in 1497. So, Europeans, though, they want to begin to explore the uncharted areas of Africa, because everywhere that anybody in Europe had gone in Africa was on coastal ports, usually to pick up slaves, sugar, and other goods from Africa that they wanted to sell. Now, Europeans, though, they want to chart the uncharted areas of Africa. They want to explore the other places, known as the interior, which they have heard from other Africans is packed full of other raw materials, because it's dense rainforest, so something out there has got to be growing out there that they want. One of the biggest items that they knew was out there, though, was ivory. Ivory, of course, being that of elephant tusks, and they already knew that those animals existed inside the continent, but the problem was they couldn't get there. They didn't know how to get there without dying. They couldn't navigate the rivers because the rivers were at so many rapids, waterfalls, and the terrain is so bad in Africa, it's very hard to navigate it easily by river, but the steamboats are going to change that, and so are also, and it's going to make it very easy to navigate up. And if you hit rapids, they would build railroads around the rapids, so the steamboat could be picked up, moved around it, so they could have a train that would transport goods around the rapids, and then another steamboat would be waiting for them at calm, tranquil water, and they would just keep chugging on the way up. Maxim guns was a big thing as well. Whatever happens, we have got the Maxim gun, and they have not. A Maxim gun is, of course, the very, very first fully automatic machine gun. As in, when I say fully automatic, you can pull down on the trigger, and it's and it's just letting off rounds constantly. Now, the Maxim gun is going to be a big, big contributor to the colonization of Africa later on as well. And then also, medicine is going to be a big thing as well, when we talked about it earlier with quinine medicine. Now, Europeans are also going to have little to no trouble acquiring any part of Africa that they absolutely want, the worst of all being the Belgian conquest of the Congo. Now, this is Africa in 1870. So looking at Africa, you've got all these different people control these different areas. You got down here, you got the Dutch and the British after, in the Transvaal and the Orange State. That's a whole nother thing we could talk about. The Boer Wars. Whew. And then you've got all these areas. The Portuguese control this, but look at it. It's all on the coast. And this is in 1870. This is what it looked. And then in 1884, by 1884, Europeans are literally scrambling for Africa. They are rushing in as fast as they possibly can to try and grab up stuff after all these new technologies that came around. The steamboats, the quinine medicine, the fully automatic guns to be able to suppress any Africans that they come into contact with. Because imagine thousands of Africans running at 2 Maxim guns, and those Maxim guns have thousands of rounds that they can just let off, but all the Africans have is wooden shields and spears. They're gonna lose that fight. And in 1884, the Berlin Conference was held by your boy Otto von Bismarck. Ooh, this is another one of his kind of negative things that we don't like to talk about. Now, in 1884, he holds the Berlin Conference, which is a meeting in Berlin to split up the territory in Africa. No African officials were invited whatsoever. Not a one. All of them were just European white guys meeting up in a big room to discuss how they were going to divvy up an entire continent full of millions of people. By 1904, almost the entire continent of Africa was owned by Europeans. There were only 2 places outlined in green, right here and right here, not green, gray, right here and right here, that were not going to fall subject to European imperialism in Africa. So over 90% of Africa is owned by Europeans, all leading up to 1914. The 2 areas are actually Liberia, because that was colonized by freed American slaves, and the United States refused to let anybody have that. And this area right here, Ethiopia, because Ethiopia was actually on, most of the Ethiopian areas were on top of high mountains, and the Ethiopians had already traded with Europeans before, had access to guns, and they were good at preventing people from coming up and actually taking anything from them. So now, if you look at this bad boy, Otto von Bismarck had a plan the entire time, and his plan was that if you own major coastal area, it's like a piece of pie. You kind of get to go all the way down into the center, and that was what the British, the French, the British, The British got this as well. Germany is going to get some areas right here along Germany, East Africa and Southwest Africa, Cameroon as well. So a lot of these different areas, but this one by far was the worst one. The Belgian Congo. Whew, Leopold II, terrible, terrible person. Now, anyway, going forward though, the biggest negatives of imperialism as well, going off the example of not only Africa, but all the examples that we've talked about up to this point. Many African nations are going to refuse. They're going to refuse and they're going to lead revolts. And this did not make Europeans use force. They just did. That is a terrible word. I don't want you to write that. The Europeans would use force to kill many of these natives. There was one really big example of a battle where 5,000 Africans went up against 50 British guys and 4 Maxim guns. And 90% of the Africans were killed by 50 British guys and 4 Maxim guns. And not one of the British men were even. I think one of them was hurt because he fell off his horse. So land was taken from native tribes that had lived there for over thousands of years. Religions and social structures are going to be destroyed. There are now African tribes and languages that don't exist anymore because Europeans eradicated them as a people. Now, paternalism and racism is going to be another big problem that comes along with the imperialistic nature of Europe during this time period. Big way to... Let me explain paternalism real quick, and then I'll explain how this phrase is actually a good way to explain it. Paternalism is this idea that the Europeans were cultured, knew better, and their job was to go out there and save these savage peoples from themselves. Now, this is a disgusting view that actually was popularized during the 1800s because a lot of Europeans had heard from writings like The Descent of Man, as well as The Origin of Species by Charles Darwin, that, white people are the epitome of race, which we know to be absolutely false today, but they're going to use this as this idea of paternalism, this paternal view of Africans, like they are lost children that don't know how to get by, and they need the guidance of Europeans to bring them into the light of not only Christ, but also of modernization, which is disgusting. And one of the ways to explain that was this thing written by Rudyard Kipling. It was known as The White Man's Burden. White Man's Burden, I believe, was a poem, because Rudyard Kipling was a poet. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, it's a poem. Now, this poem was trying to explain how it was the responsibility of Europeans to save that of the African souls, but it's absolutely ridiculous. Now, fun fact, though, Rudyard Kipling also wrote another story because he's British, where did the British also take over? India? Guess what story he wrote about a lost jungle boy, lost Indian jungle boy being raised by animals and the beauties that he thought India was. Yeah, The Jungle Book. Rudyard Kipling also wrote The Jungle Book. And then the last one, though, Social Darwinism. Social Darwinism was a perspective that was adopted by people who took the ideas of Charles Darwin on evolution and twisted and contorted them to fit their needs. And social Darwinism is the idea that strong societies survive and weak ones must fall, which is also disgusting and racist. So anyway, I think that's it right there. Yep, I believe that's it. And yep, so that's imperialism for you. Glad you guys could kind of come and enjoy me on my couch talk. It was a lot more chill and calm today. I kind of enjoyed it, though. So let me know what you thought in the comments. I'll leave a description link in there as well. If you're interested in this imperialism stuff, you can go look up or watch the video on the Belgian conquest of the Congo. But I'll talk to y'all soon. Y'all have a good one.